15th of July. Our top stories tonight. Victoria heads into its 5th COVID lockdown in a bid to combat the spread of the Delta strain. Authorities in New South Wales warn the state risks another COVID wave. Indonesia overtakes India as the COVID epicentre of Asia with 50,000 new infections. And at least 6 people killed and 30 missing after floods devastate Germany and Belgium. You're watching The World. Also tonight, Turkey, 5 years on from a coup that brought on a severe government crackdown. Well, in developing news tonight, the ABC understands a person with COVID-19 attended the Wallabies versus France rugby union match at Amy Park in Melbourne on Tuesday night. It follows the discovery that at least 3 people caught the virus during the football at the MCG on Saturday, sending Victorians into their 5th lockdown since the start of the pandemic. At this stage, it's going to last for 5 days. In just under 2 hours, there'll only be 5 reasons to leave home, including caregiving, essential work for medical reasons, education if it can't be done from home, and to get vaccinated. Residents will have to now stick to a 5-kilometre radius to go shopping and to exercise. Home visits are no longer permitted. The return to tight restrictions follows concerns over the spread of the Delta variant, and Premier Daniel Andrews says this highly infectious nature of the strain left him with little choice.
We would prefer that this had not come to our state. We would prefer that we didn't have to deal with these issues, but this is so infectious. This is such a challenge that we must do this. You only get one chance to go hard and go fast. If you wait, if you hesitate, if you doubt, then you will always be looking back wishing you had done more earlier. I am not prepared to avoid a 5-day lockdown now only to find ourselves in a 5-week or a 5-month lockdown. That's why we're making this very difficult decision, and it's why I know Victorians will, despite the pain and the difficulty of this, know and understand that there is no option. What's more, they'll know and understand that they each have an important part to play in the success of this lockdown. And to my last breath, I will work to keep this state safe. And, I can't control what happens and doesn't happen in New South Wales. These cases started in New South Wales, but I'm determined that they'll end here, because we will put this out with the help of every single Victorian.
And as we heard earlier, one of the exposure sites that is concerning contact tracers is the Melbourne Cricket Ground, with more cases transmitted there on the weekend. Reporter Jessica Longbottom has more from the MCG.
We have had positive cases attend games at the MCG before, but we've never had a case of transmission. It's not usually a venue that overly concerns contact tracers. It's well ventilated. Most of it is open air, and you don't usually see transmission in that context. The fact that they've seen 3 stranger-to-stranger transmission, what they label fleeting transmission, really has them concerned. They're concerned it could have spread to other people who were here at the Level 2 MCC Members Reserve on Saturday afternoon. What's also concerning them is at least one of those people infected today wasn't even sitting in the direct area around the initial positive case. The virus is also moving very fast. One of the people infected on Saturday has already gone on to infect 2 of his family members. So certainly this whole scenario played a large part in calling the lockdown this afternoon.
And Melbourne-based epidemiologist Tony Blakely says a 5-day lockdown may be enough to get the situation under control.
Things have changed a lot today. At the beginning of the day, I thought we'd get away without a lockdown, but that transmission happening at the MCG is a complete game changer. It just shows you how quickly this is moving. 5 days is exactly what I would have picked as well, because it's the average incubation period and will hopefully be enough time to see whatever chains of transmission we don't know about out in the community extinguish if everybody's at home, and certainly give the contact tracers enough time to get ahead of it. So 5 days is what I would have picked as well.
Authorities in New South Wales say they are still seeing far too many people in the community while infectious, putting the state at risk of another wave. 65 cases recorded there today was the lowest Sydney has seen in 4 days. But the state's Premier has warned that they're in uncharted waters because of the rapid spread of the Delta variant. Kathleen Calderwood reports.
بس أكيد لو كنت هلا أنا أخذ الفاكسين يمكن ما كنت هون.
A cautionary tale from the COVID ward. Khalid Al Masri is a father of 4, aged in his 40s. Pondering how this could have been prevented.
صعب كثير. أنا صار لي كم يوم هلا شوي رجعت عم بقدر أحكي نفسي رجع شوي.
GP Jamal Rifi published the video with permission. It's spoken in Arabic to get the message out to his local community.
We had about 9,000 people who watched that video, and I had numerous phone calls from community members inquiring how they can get a booking for the vaccination.
Today's 65 cases for New South Wales is the 3rd straight day under 100, but the number of cases who've been infectious in the community is remaining consistently high. That number needs to be 0 or close to it for the lockdown to end. And at this stage, the government maintains restrictions don't need to be tightened to help achieve it. But worrying authorities is that people with COVID symptoms are going to their doctors or pharmacies, and the government is continuing to refuse to define what is essential work.
Why not tighten that though? The Victoria did it very successfully, and you're saying
No, they didn't.
Infections are taking place in hospitals too. Some staff from Liverpool Hospital have been forced into isolation, and a nurse from Westmead's COVID ward caught the virus despite wearing protective gear.
It's pleasing that Westmead nurse was fully vaccinated and didn't have any symptoms. But we know the vaccines are highly effective in protecting against severe disease.
Liverpool Ambulance Station is now being deep cleaned after 3 paramedics caught the virus. One was already in isolation after coming into contact with a COVID-positive patient. Kathleen Calderwood, ABC News, Sydney.
Fiji has today reported 1,220 new infections. It's the biggest spike in daily COVID cases since the beginning of the pandemic. In the last 24 hours, there's been no new deaths from the virus and just over 210 people have recovered. There are now more than 11,000 active cases in the country. Overseas now, and Papua New Guinea has detected its first case of the Delta variant, a 65-year-old Filipino man who was captaining a cargo vessel travelling from Indonesia. The patient is in isolation in a Port Moresby private hospital after genomic sequencing confirmed he had the variant. 6 other crew have tested positive for COVID-19, but it's not yet known if they have the Delta strain.
We'll continue to work and to do all we can to keep the strain under control and from spreading in our country.
Authorities fear low vaccination rates will leave the country vulnerable if the more infectious variant spreads. Indonesia has seen another huge spike in cases, now even surpassing India's current daily infection numbers. Indonesia recorded more than 54,000 new cases yesterday. Health officials fear the Delta variant is now spreading beyond the islands of Java and Bali, where a partial lockdown remains in place. Our Indonesia correspondent, Ann Barker.
It's become the grim soundtrack to the pandemic in Jakarta. Residents across the capital hear ambulance sirens blaring all day and night. Often it's volunteer drivers who respond to the emergency calls.
I definitely feel scared about getting infected, as all humans will have such feelings. But this is for humanity, and I'm doing this from my heart.
In full protective gear, 53-year-old Sunario heads out to pick up another COVID-19 patient and take him to a nearby hospital. Ambulance drivers say they can get up to 80 calls a day to transport those infected, but they can only deal with about 30 in the space of 24 hours. Since the latest surge in infections began last month, demand for ambulances has soared. Volunteers are working in addition to government hospital ambulances.
The spike in cases that happened here in Java Island and mostly in Jakarta can't be handled by the government alone. Support from the people and volunteers like us is also a must. and we can end the pandemic faster.
The highly contagious Delta variant has seen a surge in patient numbers across Jakarta and much of Java in recent weeks. Indonesia yesterday recorded another 54,000 cases, almost 10 times the caseload in early June. Daily deaths are around 1,000 a day. And health experts predict case numbers will continue to rise as the Delta variant spreads beyond Java and Bali to more and more Indonesian provinces. Anne Barker, ABC News.
Tokyo recorded more than 1,100 new COVID infections with a little over a week until the Olympics opening ceremony. The alarming spike marked the 25th straight day of week-on-week infection increases and is higher than the peak of the capital's fourth wave. Meanwhile, Australia's women's soccer team recorded an underwhelming 1-0 loss against Japan in their final practice match ahead of the Games in Western Japan. Here's our North Asia correspondent Jake Sturmer in Tokyo.
The green and gold was tough to spot in the crowd, but there were a handful of Aussie fans.
We'll be out there cheering as loud as we can.
I guess we have 2 beers already. We'll be okay.
2 beers will work.
It wasn't the result Australia was hoping for a week out from the Olympic opener. The Matildas have had a tough run in the lead-up. And last night, the Japanese women's side were just a class above.
While fans are being allowed in tonight, they're not supposed to cheer or chant, only clap. Despite that, there is a sense of excitement just to be here. Unfortunately, by the time the Matildas get to Tokyo, there'll be no one in the stands, organisers having banned spectators from the Games because of rising COVID cases in the capital.
I think most of our players are used to play with those circumstances because it's been a different year. So I think we're used to it, even though we would love to have people in the stands, but we are prepared for it.
Outside of Tokyo, feelings towards the Games are mixed.
I went to the Sydney Olympics. The atmosphere was great, and I was hoping for something like that this time. There's nothing we can do, but I'm hopeful to somehow be a part of the Olympics from far away.
In the capital, infections are soaring, raising alarm ahead of competition starting next week. But with fans banned and assurances of a strict COVID bubble, organisers are promising a safe and secure Games. The hope from athletes and the Japanese public is that they deliver on their word. Jake Sturmer, ABC News, Kyoto.
Well, Donna Weeks is a lecturer in Japanese politics at Musashino University, and she joins us out of Tokyo. Donna, we're listening to our correspondent say Tokyo insists they're going to deliver a safe and secure Games, but this is looking like it could become a real super spreader event, doesn't it?
It does, yes, and I'm coming to you from 10 floors above the very heart of some of the venues. Just outside my window here, I can see the second, well, what will be the second Olympic flame. I mean, my campus is right in the middle of where the International Media Centre is. So in the last few days, we've had a lot of journalists and people coming in, and you can sort of start to feel that tension rising, certainly.
So let's talk about that tension. You know, you've got, as you say, athletes and their delegations turning up. How are people around you, the people that you know and move among, feeling about this influx?
The feelings are mixed. I mean, on the one hand, of course, as the Olympics, people want a successful Olympics, but under the circumstances, with the particularly the spike, and the latest numbers today put cases at 1,300 here in Tokyo. That's news that's just come in. People are very concerned about the extent to which we'll be able to resist, you know, being a super spreader event.
And officials from the IRC are not necessarily spreading a good example from the public's point of view, with Thomas Bach touring the country and seemingly able to travel while many others are not.
That's right, and I think that's part of the tension that's arising amongst a lot of people, is that the IOC seem to be making rules for themselves while the rest of us, and let's face it, we're all going to now be under a state of emergency so that the Games can go on. So I guess a lot of people here are feeling that we're making quite a sacrifice so that the Games can happen. So, and that's causing I might even go as far as to say some resentment, unfortunately.
Not surprisingly, because it had, we'd seen the numbers of people saying, why are we going ahead with this game? It was a decision really that almost wasn't even in Tokyo or Japan's hands, wasn't it? It was the IOC dictating that.
It was the IOC, yes, yeah. Yes. If it had gone, if the governor of Tokyo, Koike, had any say in it, perhaps even if Suga, the Prime Minister, felt a little more able to say something, I think it might have at least been postponed yet again. But no, I think it's the IOC that's telling us what to do.
Yeah, they're calling the shots. Epidemiologists have warned that organisers, in fact, don't have the right measures in place to effectively stop this becoming a super spreader. They're talking about ventilation in the venues and in the Olympic Village. Have people been assured about this? Do you feel assured that they do have the right procedures in place?
Look, I think as much as they possibly can do under the circumstances. I mean, we're fairly well acclimatised now. This is our fourth state of emergency in the last 18 months. We're quite acclimatised to ensuring that we all wear masks. There's very little argument about that on the day-to-day basis. We're always hand sanitizer on every floor of the building here, for example. So as much as can be done is being done, I think. It's just going to be, and the athletes and others are supposed to be playing by a playbook, a so-called playbook, where they're under fairly strong restrictions too. But we're keeping our fingers crossed that they'll do the right thing by us, we'll do the right thing by them, and hopefully in a few weeks' time we'll be able to say, well, we got through it.
Yes, indeed. Tell us about the vaccination race. It's obviously not going to catch up in time to help people in Tokyo.
No, it won't. There was some anticipation that most people would be vaccinated by the end of July. Certainly the rate has picked up in the last couple of weeks. I mean, there's no denying that. I was going to try and get mine, but my local government area is still focusing on the over 65s, so I just miss out. But outside Tokyo and the greater Tokyo region, the rates do seem to be picking up. But yeah, Tokyo's been slowed up a little bit because of the demand, and also it seems that there's some problems with supply along the way as well. So.
And if you're in the midst of an Olympic precinct, I know we can't have spectators at the Games now. Can you get a peek outside your window of any of the events?
Well, I've got the tennis courts just over the back here, so I said to Ash Barty, if you're practising on the outside courts, I'll wave to you. I've got the canoeing venue outside my window, so I won't really see them. I did have tickets. I did manage to get tickets for a couple of events, and I'm disappointed now that I won't be able to go and see them. Probably feeling safer that I won't, though, to be honest. But no, this is mainly the international media area, so I'll be bumping into a lot of journalists, no doubt.
Well, let's hope, as you say, in a couple of weeks' time, this will have gone off well. Good to talk. Thanks, Donna.
Thanks very much, Rip. Bye.
In Germany, at least 6 people, including 2 firemen, have died. 30 people are missing as once-in-a-generation floods wreak havoc in the country's southwest. The strong currents have cut through roads and submerged streets. Police say 6 houses have been washed away and about 25 more homes are at risk. The military has been deployed to help stranded residents. In Belgium, at least 2 people have died in the floods, with cars and houses carried away by rising waters. The torrential rain in both European nations is expected to continue into Friday evening. And after a week of record temperatures in the United States, wildfires continue to spread across 12 states in the West. It's forced evacuations in southern Oregon and threatened the power supply for neighbouring California. Officials have described the intensity of the mega fire as unprecedented this early in the fire season.
America's heatwave has seen temperatures hit 54 degrees Celsius in some parts, fueling massive wildfires such as this one in Oregon, which is still burning after 9 days. At least 67 weather stations have recorded their hottest temperatures ever this summer. Washington State has declared a drought emergency, citing climate change as a horrendous threat.
This wave of climate change is breaking across our state from east to west, north to south, in every particular climate that we have. And we have to recognize this in some sense. This is the summer of climate change.
Nearly 60 large wildfires are still burning across 10 parched western states.
I've worked in fire for the past 30 years, and never in the 30 years have we ever been at a very high at the end of June.
Thousands of homes have been destroyed, with many residents displaced.
Due to the weather conditions and everything we've had, this area was just waiting for a fire. And it's just terrible that these people have lost their home.
Because my house burned down. What can I do?
Residents in this small Californian town have finally been able to return to their homes, many finding nothing but ash and debris.
I'm totally lost. I have no idea in this world what I'm going to do now.
According to the National Interagency Fire Centre, more than 1 million acres have burned in 68 large fires and complexes across 12 states. At least 91 people have perished in Washington's heatwave alone.
This one moved so quick and so fast that it took everyone by surprise.
Thousands of residents remain evacuated, with the threat from blazes not yet over. Yvonne Yong, ABC News.
South Africa is boosting the number of troops deployed in response to deadly riots sparked by the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma. The government has ordered 25,000 military personnel onto the streets after more than 70 people were killed in the unrest. The King of South Africa's Zulu Nation has appealed for calm, warning that chaos is damaging the country. South Africans are facing major food shortages as rioters upend supply chains by looting supermarkets and torching goods trucks. The United States is to begin evacuating Afghan interpreters who worked with American forces by the end of the month. As Taliban fighters make a violent push to retake control of territory, there are fears Afghans who worked with the coalition will be targeted. The US has not disclosed how many interpreters will be relocated.
But it is safe to say that we are planning for a range of contingencies. We are moving as swiftly as we can in the processing.
The Australian government has defended delays in processing visas for interpreters, saying they need to make sure applicants have not switched allegiances to the Taliban. As countries work to get interpreters out of Afghanistan, we've seen graphic videos circulating of violent and horrific acts supposedly committed by the Taliban. For more, I'm joined by journalist, author and analyst Lynn O'Donnell, who has been in Kabul. Lynn, these very graphic videos circulating from the Taliban, purportedly showing 2 beheadings, a 3rd murder by dismembering, a violent attack on a woman. Are they real and can they be verified?
Hi, Bev. Yeah, there's no reason to think that they're not real, to be honest with you. The Taliban have a pretty good system of advertising what they're doing. They have social media, they have websites, and they really like to put it about what they do. Yes, you're right. Some of them are really horrific. People being shot in cold blood, including soldiers, people being killed for their ethnicity. We're also hearing terrible things about how young women and girls are being kidnapped in areas that the Taliban are going into and married off. Women told that they have to wear the full covering hijab, stay at home, newspapers.
Lynn, you've just frozen there. I'll just ask a question because sometimes that kind of releases the problem. Just how much of an inroad then is the Taliban making with these kind of violent statements? We may have lost Lynn. We've lost Lynn. We'll come back to her as soon as possible. Well, the Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has been hospitalised for an obstructed intestine and could receive emergency surgery. The 66-year-old was admitted to a military hospital for chronic hiccups, but was transferred to Sao Paulo to undergo tests on his bowel. It's his latest health complication from a 2018 stabbing which almost killed him and resulted in multiple follow-up surgeries. It comes as the far-right leader's popularity is sinking due to his handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Singer and actress Olivia Rodrigo has met with US President Joe Biden and Dr. Anthony Fauci to encourage more young people to get a COVID vaccine. The 18-year-old pop sensation is known for her hits Driver's License and Good For You. Her visit to the Oval Office is part of the Biden administration's plan to convince more millennials and Gen Zers to get the jab. The US Centre for Disease Control and Prevention says young people are getting vaccinated at a much lower rate than adults. Before she left the White House, she and President Biden got a few photos and videos to get on the socials to get their message across.
It's so important that we all get vaccinated. It doesn't matter if you're young and healthy, getting the vaccine is about protecting yourself, your friends, and your family. Let's get vaccinated.
Well, scattered protests have broken out in Haiti's capital a week after the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse pitched the Caribbean nation into uncertainty. Protesters closed main roads with burning tyres, demanding better security and law and order. Port-au-Prince plunged into chaos after Mr Moïse's murder, with reports gangs are now kidnapping and killing citizens in broad daylight. The investigation into the assassination is ongoing, but police have identified a former Haitian senator as a key player in the assassination plot.
John Joel Joseph.
The ex-senator Joseph John Joel has played a very important role. He was the one who provided the weapons, he planned the encounters, he established contact with the intellectual authors. He participated in the assassination of the president. Police are looking for him.
Well, with lockdowns continuing, the Prime Minister has once again increased the financial support being offered by the federal government. COVID disaster payments will be made even more accessible and paid earlier for any person locked down for more than a week and unable to work.
12 million Australians will be in lockdown from midnight. Australia's two biggest cities and surrounds, so often rivals, united by a common hardship.
Rules that you think might be appropriate one time, sometimes have to change.
Since JobKeeper ended in March, there have been several adjustments to federal financial support.
You adapt, you change, you update, you streamline, you make it more simple.
From now on, workers affected by a lockdown greater than 7 days will receive up to $600 a week, including the first week backdated. The liquid assets test is ditched altogether, and businesses will start receiving up to $10,000 a week after the first fortnight if their turnover falls by at least 30%, split 50-50 between the Commonwealth and the state, but administered by the federal government.
We have to set up rules that apply right across the country.
Scott Morrison will put the new plan to National Cabinet tomorrow, along with a proposal for the states and Commonwealth to equally split the cost of income support for lockdowns shorter than 7 days.
We expect that the Commonwealth Government will step up and help those people who need that help.
The new arrangements anticipate more lockdowns until the vaccination rate is much higher.
Until we get the population fully vaccinated, we do not get to the other side of COVID-19.
I imagine we'll be doing very well if we get to 70% of people wanting to be vaccinated.
The federal government knows a higher proportion of vaccination would give greater confidence, encouraging everyone to have at least one by year's end, the goal.
If you wanted one, you could have had one. So you've had a conscious decision about whether you've sought to protect yourself from what is a very virulent virus.
It wasn't long ago that the Prime Minister was commending Gladys Berejiklian's gold standard approach to avoiding lockdown in New South Wales. So today is significant because Scott Morrison has surrendered to the realisation that sometimes there's no option, given the speed with which the Delta strain can spread. And importantly, the PM's now prepared to share the cost of lockdowns from the start, long or short. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
All right, let's get back to journalist, author and analyst Lynn O'Donnell in Kabul. And Lynn, we were talking about these awful graphic videos that the Taliban is circulating. How much of an inroad are they making with territory being seized and you know, how much of a threat are they now to Afghans?
The Taliban, you mean? Yeah.
Yes.
The Taliban summer offensive has been rolling out in a pretty brutal manner. It started in the south where the poppy harvest is, and it moved up to the north. Basically, the strategy has been to surround the country. So they've been taking areas where they control the poppy production, cross-border points where they transship their drugs. I mean, you've got to remember that this is the biggest drug cartel in the world, and they've been laying siege, if you like, to the major cities. They haven't taken any major cities, but I don't think that's part of the strategy. But the way the violence has unfolded in the last couple of months is really planting a lot of fear amongst ordinary Afghan people, and they are worried that their government doesn't have the correct response, that their security forces, their army, their air force, etc., are not strong enough and are not reacting quickly enough, and that this is undermining the very foundations of government here.
And it talks to the fact that the US are moving very rapidly out of the country. Is the Afghan government completely ill-prepared to manage this? Seems as if we have lost Lynn yet again. As you can imagine, we're trying to get a Skype from Kabul, one of the most difficult cities in the world, and of course racked by that new and refreshed violence. Our top stories tonight on The World. The ABC understands a person with COVID attended the Wallabies versus France rugby union match at Amy Park in Melbourne on Tuesday night. As Victoria is set to return to lockdown for the 5th time for 5 days from midnight as case numbers climb due to the Delta variant. And New South Wales has warned that people must remain vigilant after another worrying number of infections due to community spread. So let's go back to our top story, and the whole state of Victoria will be back in lockdown for the next 5 days. Now, the trigger point was the discovery that at least 3 people caught the virus at the footy at the MCG on Saturday, and of course tonight that developing news that a positive test has been identified as someone who attended the rugby union match on Tuesday at Amy Park. Late this afternoon, the Premier Daniel Andrews said there was no other choice, and in an veiled swipe at New South Wales said now is not the time for dawdling. Bridget Rollison with the story.
Here we go again.
The Chief Health Officer and the Public Health team have recommended to me and my Cabinet colleagues that we lock Victoria down.
The 5-kilometre radius is back, and there are only 5 reasons to leave your home as Victoria enters its 5th lockdown.
These cases started in New South Wales, but I'm determined that they'll end here because we will put this out with the help of every single Victorian.
The rules are the same as last month's lockdown. Retail is closed and online learning is back.
If you were authorised to work then, you will be authorised to work now. If you were closed then, you will be closed now.
The strict measures enforced after transmission between strangers at the MCG.
The fact of the matter is that it is moving so fast and it's so infectious.
A man in his 60s who lives at the Ariel Apartments in Maribyrnong is believed to be the source of 3 other infections in the MCC members reserve at the Carlton-Geelong AFL match on Saturday night. They weren't sitting together.
Struck it pretty well. Oh, loves it. You cannot strike it any better than that.
MCC members have been urged to get tested.
Whatever you're doing at the moment, stop doing it. Please come and get tested so we can get that information and get you safe and secure.
One of those cases is a grade 4 student at St Patrick's Primary School in Murrumbina in Melbourne's southeast. The school was the 3rd to close in the past 24 hours, and all students have been ordered to get tested.
People know in Victoria more than any other part of the country, 5 days of pain is much better than 5 weeks or 5 months.
There are now 18 cases in total linked to the removalists and family from New South Wales. In the past 72 hours, contact tracers have identified more than 70 exposure sites, and 6,500 close contacts are in isolation.
But as fast as they're moving, they're just keeping pace with this virus. They're not getting in front of it.
And Victorians have responded quickly too, with huge lines at testing sites across the state.
Victorian businesses again suffer at the hands of the virus being carried in from another state.
The state opposition says lockdowns should be a last resort, and the government's pulled the trigger early.
We can't keep living like this. We can't keep going into lockdown every time we get 10 or 12 cases in the community.
Masks are once again mandatory indoors and outdoors, and there's a good reason why. One man who spent 5 hours with the removalists who sparked this outbreak was wearing a mask and is yet to catch the virus. His neighbours who weren't wearing masks have tested positive. Bridget Rollison, ABC News, Melbourne.
Regional Victoria hasn't been spared from the lockdown after COVID cases were detected in the southwest, central and northern parts of the state. Many of the towns caught up haven't seen active cases since last year, but residents have turned out in big numbers to get tested today. And the Premier has hinted that if no further cases emerge, regional areas could be released from lockdown sooner than Greater Melbourne. Here's Stephen Schubert.
Testing times in Barwon Heads, a 2-hour wait to get a test in the seaside town, with exposure sites quickly stretching across the state.
2 chains of transmission, at least one of those chains moving very actively and very aggressively across the state.
The Barwon Heads Footy Club is now a Tier 1 exposure site for players and coaches after a case attended a local match. And the primary school is shut after a student tested positive, linked to the Aerial Apartments in Maribyrnong. Exposure sites were also declared in the Geelong suburb of Warn Ponds, with a petrol station and a nearby stationery shop closed. Further north, Bacchus Marsh Grammar closed its campus after a confirmed case. And in Balan, locals have been out in droves to get tested. Other exposure sites include a petrol station in Gindra, just north of the Victorian-New South Wales border.
There weren't lots and lots of people going through, but there's always the potential.
Regional Victoria was largely protected from the worst of Melbourne's outbreak last year, thanks to the ring of steel around the city. These cases in Barwon Heads are the first in the Geelong region since September. While all of Victoria will go into lockdown, unaffected regions may get an early mark.
We will release those parts of regional Victoria that it is safe to release before next Tuesday, if it is safe to do so.
The removalists who brought the virus into Victoria from New South Wales are now subject to a criminal investigation and could be fined in multiple jurisdictions.
If it turns out that they get an infringement notice because they failed to comply in our area, that they failed to wear a mask in our area, that's exactly what we'll be.
That may be of little comfort to Victorians who are once again paying the price. Stephen Schubert, ABC News, Barwon Heads.
Well, the jump in cases on the East Coast has prompted a tightening of restrictions in South Australia. From midnight tonight, people entering SA from Melbourne, Geelong and Bacchus Marsh will need to quarantine for 2 weeks. The number of people allowed in venues will be cut to half capacity. Masks will be required indoors in high-risk settings. Authorities are also ramping up testing on the border with Victoria, with SA Health confirming a third exposure site linked to the Sydney removalists.
The deteriorating situation around the country is a major wake-up call for South Australia.
There's heightened concern in Queensland too. Just a day before restrictions were set to ease, the state has detected 3 new infections who'd been active in the community. One of the cases is a 12-year-old boy who's believed to have acquired the virus in Sydney. Restrictions in southeast Queensland will now remain in place for at least the next week. Well, the World Health Organisation says deaths from coronavirus and new infections rose around the globe last week after 9 straight weeks of decline. Infections were up by 10% last week, fatalities by 3%. The highest numbers of new cases were in Brazil, India, Indonesia and Britain. The agency says the highly transmissible Delta variant of the virus has now been detected in 111 countries and is expected to become the globally dominant strain in the coming months. And Spain's top court has struck down the country's strict stay-at-home coronavirus lockdown. It ruled the measures were unconstitutional because the limitations on movement violate a citizen's basic rights. The court made the ruling in response to a lawsuit brought by Spain's far-right Vox party. The decision leaves the door open for people who were fined for breaking the rules to reclaim the money that they had paid. Well, today marks 5 years since an attempted coup in Turkey that changed the course of the country's democracy. On the evening of the 15th of June, a faction within the Turkish military tried to take over. but they ultimately failed. And since then, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has detained hundreds of thousands of opponents, including public servants, journalists and academics. Abdul Hamid Biligi was watching on that night from Washington, where he had fled after the newspaper he ran was taken over by the government just months earlier. And he joins us live. Good to talk to you, Hamid. Now, what struck you when you're looking back to that moment 5 years ago about this coup as it played out?
It was terrible for a Turkish citizen and for a journalist to see such a horrible attempt to destroy democracy. I condemned it, and I still condemn it. But I mean, since I'm a journalist for over 25 years, I know the Turkish history that had 5 successful, quote-unquote, military interventions in one way or another. So this was not similar to those coup attempts that were successfully carried. So it was like a caricature or a cartoon of a real coup, because the timing was miserable, the coordination was miserable, and it failed in a couple of hours. And it was clear that it will fail, because the coups usually in Turkey and in the world generally happens in the early morning when people are in their beds. But this was on prime time, and the media was live. You know, the first thing that the coup generals do is to silence the media, but this was not the case. So, and the media was live, but the orchestrators of the coup were trying to close down the traffic on one side of the bridge in Istanbul, which has no meaning for a successful coup. So, I mean, still, there are lots of thousands of question marks about the authenticity of the coup. So many people think that this was an orchestrated or staged coup, which benefited only Erdogan and his party.
But of course, Erdogan blamed it on supporters of Gulen's Hizmet movement, a movement you've been linked to. What do you say to those accusations?
I mean, I wish, whoever participated to such a coup is an horrible act, as I said in the beginning, and I condemn. But, I mean, the conditions were so bad that we, as the citizens of the country, are not able to see a real picture of what happened really on July 15, because at that night, 5,000 judges and prosecutors were purged, which has nothing to do with the coup. So 200 critical media outlets were silenced and shut down. More than 200 journalists were imprisoned. So under those conditions, how you can see what is the real motive and what happened in July 15? So today, after 5 years, still we don't have a clear picture of what happened. But looking retrospectively, and when I see the Erdogan's description of the coup as a gift from God at that night, so now, looking retrospectively, I see that it helped only Erdogan. So the opposition destroyed. Now the biggest opposition party's chairman is in jail. You know how he defined the coup attempt? He said this is the biggest conspiracy of our century. And the main opposition party leader defined the coup as a controlled coup, which Erdogan knew coming but did not do anything to stop it.
And to your
point, 250 people.
Yeah, and to your point,
killed.
I mean, it really just started the collapse of democracy in Turkey, which is what we are looking at today.
I mean, the destruction of democracy did not start with the coup, of course, and Turkey was never a perfect democracy. It was struggling to be a better democracy. But my newspaper, for instance, was silenced 5 months before the coup. And several other newspapers and TV stations were shut down before the coup, even 1 year before the coup. So Turkey, I mean, Erdogan was doing good in terms of democracy until 2011, 2012. But then he switched from a democratic path into an autocratic path. And the coup attempt, the July 15, was the last nail in the coffin of the Turkish democracy. So That, I mean, if we miss that point, we will not understand it correctly. And now I see 7,000 academics are purged. As I said, 5,000 judges are purged from their positions, and there is no independent media, no independent judiciary, and there are opposition parties still, but they are proposing to investigate what happened on July 15th, but those proposals are rejected by the members of the ruling party, Erdogan's party. This is very strange. Those journalists still, some of them are attempting to investigate what happened really, but some of them were jailed just because of those questions, that they are questioning the official narrative.
Yeah, and your newspaper, before it was shut down, had been quite supportive of some of the policies of Erdogan, and then you said the mood shifted. What do you think was driving the fear that you saw in Erdogan, and the reason that he felt he needed to pursue this crackdown?
I think 2013 is the critical year for this. I mean, in the summer of 2013, there was some protest we call Gezi protest in the downtown Istanbul. The young people were protesting Erdogan not to destroy a green park, a small area, not to construct a shopping mall on top of that. And Turkey was a rising star of democracy in the world. So in shock of us who were supporting Erdogan, in shock of all the world supporting Erdogan, Erdogan destroyed those protesters, and the police killed a couple of people, unfortunately. So this was one of the very important time that Erdogan switched from democratic path to authoritarian perspective. The second was the exposition of the corruption at the end of that same year, that his ministers and his relatives, his family members, were involved in a very dark bribe scheme, which involved violating international sanctions against Iran in return to getting some bribes from a businessman. So in that position, Erdogan had two options. Either he could destroy democracy and judiciary and free media to survive, or to go to the court to respond to the allegations. Erdogan picked this first option. So since then...
Yep. And what...
Since then, we... Excuse me.
No, I was going to say, so in terms of that, though, what hope do you have that any rights are going to be restored, that there is any hope for this to come to an end somehow? Because even if the population are against some of what he does, he sort of controls the country with an iron fist.
You know, when the fundamentals of democracy is destroyed, it is not easy to get them back, to fix them back. Even if a majority of the Turkish people are against Erdogan, even if they hate Erdogan, but opposition is fragmented, and the media is not free. 95% of media is today under Erdogan's control. The judiciary is under his control. Parliament lost its significance after July 15. So under those conditions, Erdogan's popularity is not rising, but the mechanisms are already destroyed. So it's very difficult. But of course, this is not hopeless case. And in 2019, there was an election, and they lost some local municipalities, the main in Istanbul and in Ankara, which is an important sign that Turkish people still aspire for democracy if they can. But as I said, conditions, since 2013 became worse and worse. And unfortunately, now even the member and the leader of the third biggest party in jail. So can you imagine the situation, how it is hard to go back to democracy?
Indeed. Hamid, appreciate you talking to us and just trying to give us some analysis of where Turkey is placed today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, the European Union has unveiled plans to ban the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles within 15 years as part of an ambitious strategy to tackle climate change. The so-called Green Deal aims to more than halve Europe's emissions this decade, with the end goal of net zero by 2050. It includes a new tax on air and shipping fuels and tariffs on manufacturers that import cement, steel and aluminium into Europe.
If we don't fix this, we'll be fighting wars over water and food.
The measures need approval by 27 member states and the European Parliament, a process that could take 2 years. Parts of Brazil's Amazon rainforest are now emitting more carbon dioxide than they absorb. A study has found the emissions amount to 1 billion tonnes a year, with most caused by fires, many of which are deliberately set to clear land for beef and soy production. Hotter temperatures and droughts are also contributing factors. Scientists say it's a stark warning that slashing emissions from fossil fuels is more urgent than ever. Ethnic groups and foreign policy experts have expressed their shock and frustration about a policy which allows the Perth Theatre Trust to stop certain groups of people from hiring its venues. The Trust previously apologised to China when a Taiwan acrobatic group performed at the State Theatre and displayed its flag. But the Trust's new policy is much stricter, potentially banning any group with views at odds with the state government. It can also stop individuals or groups who identify with countries whose political status is unclear or in dispute from hiring its venues. Advocates say it raises concerns the policy was designed to appease China.
How can a democratic country and a public domain space that people pay to lease, to use, be dictated by a foreign state?
The policy was approved just 2 days after the state election. Now to what in the world, and you may remember last week we brought you the story of a giant 3D cat that meows at pedestrians as they walk through one of Tokyo's busiest neighbourhoods. The cat appears in between ads on a giant LED screen on top of a building in front of Shinjuku's train station. Now, one enthusiastic pet owner decided to recreate the setup at their home with an actual cat. It appears to include a number of boxes and ledges, giving the illusion the cat is towering over Shinjuku. And at one point, the display gets very lifelike, with the cat seemingly ready to jump out of its box. Well, 7 AFL teams fled Melbourne for Queensland today, with Richmond and Brisbane, the latest two, sharing a chartered flight to the Gold Coast tonight. The latest COVID complications have also seen all Sydney, Melbourne and Queensland Super Netball teams relocate to Adelaide.
The Swans and Giants flew out of Melbourne this morning for the derby, which had been moved from Sydney to Ballarat and now to Queensland. If that wasn't confusing enough, the rivals shared a flight. It's becoming the new normal.
I think last year we changed hotels 11 times. It's part of the game and it's the environment we're in.
The Western Bulldogs were the next to head to the Sunshine State. Then North Melbourne got the call to fly north.
Probably about an hour and a half ago. It's been a quick turnaround. Quickly have to go home and have some conversation with family and friends.
The Kangaroos and Essendon's match on Sunday has shifted from Docklands to Queensland, where the Bombers' next two matches are likely to be played. This evening it was announced Richmond and Brisbane will also fly to the Gold Coast, where they'll play tomorrow night. The AFL says the rest of this week's fixtures will remain as scheduled.
Like the last 18 months, everything's been moved around last minute, so if that does happen, we'll adapt. But at the moment, we're planning place in Kilda Saturday night at Marvel.
Although there'll be no crowds in lockdown Melbourne. Other codes are also on the move. All Sydney, Melbourne and Queensland Super Netball sides are relocating to Adelaide in what could be a condensed finish to the season. And the Melbourne Storm will join other NRL sides in heading to Queensland, flying out this evening. Peter Lustard, ABC News.
And in tonight's AFL match, Geelong has recorded a punishing 69-point win against Fremantle in Perth. It was Freo's first primetime game in 5 years, but they ended up wilting under the spotlight, managing just a single goal in the first half. And then Geelong piled on the goals in the second quarter and continued to excel despite heavy rainfall. The win puts the Cats equal first on the ladder with Melbourne as they inch closer to securing another top 4 finish. International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach says there was zero risk of Tokyo Olympic athletes and delegates infecting Japanese residents with coronavirus. Cases have hit a 6-month high in the host city, with a number of visiting athletes and people involved with the Games testing positive. But the president says there's no danger.
So the risk for the other residents of the Olympic Village and the risk for the Japanese people is zero. They will be wearing masks and they will not hang the medal around the neck of the athlete. They will present the medal on a tray to the athlete, so to avoid any kind of risk of infection.
Let's get the weather. Here's Graham Creed.
As a series of cold fronts move around a low-pressure system, we're seeing very strong and gusty winds across the southeastern states. There are severe weather warnings out for the potential of damaging winds. We also had some flood watches out through parts of New South Wales. This is due to some fairly persistent showers across very soaked catchments. We will see snow falling to alpine areas. It's as we're heading towards the evening that the coldest of the air will start to move in. By Saturday morning, that snow will be dropping down to very low levels in Victoria and New South Wales. But a highs reaching through into the west and much of the north of the continent, so relatively clear conditions there. But there will be a few coastal showers about the west and the south coast of WA.
Our top stories tonight. The ABC understands a person with COVID-19 attended the Wallabies versus France rugby union match at Amy Park in Melbourne on Tuesday night. We'll bring you more details as they come to hand. Victoria, of course, going into its fifth lockdown for 5 days. That'll happen from midnight tonight after the case numbers climb. And New South Wales has been warned to remain vigilant after another worrying number of infections in the community. And that is the show. If you'd like to see more world news and interviews, you can head to the ABC's YouTube channel. I'm Bev O'Connor. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.